there as time goes on very often. And it actually positions everything for the next thinning pass that you have your crew do. My goal ultimately is at least 7 to 8+ tons per acre. I push my vines, but I try to do it carefully. Proper fertilization is needed, and usually potassium is needed regularly with my irrigations. Potassium, or Petite Sirah rather, is a big potassium consumer. It really helps if you have the right rootstock. Put it through the drip system of fertigation. I'm currently looking into foliar applications. I've actually kind of looked through a number of our vineyards, and I'm not too proud. I got a consultant. I want him to help me with my fertilizer program because I think he can maybe see some things that I'm not seeing right now. Green thinning at the proper time is also important. It's usually done as a special pass with the crew where they're just focusing on green clusters. Oftentimes there's damage to the rachis when you start breaking clusters apart. You kind of do some injury to some of these rachises, and they kind of stand out. So you got to clip those things off and try to get your crop color and maturity as uniform as you possibly can. Again, separating, spacing, balancing, looking for rot, more cluster trimming. You need space. That's very important between clusters. Making sure that vines are also slowing way down by the time you go into veraison. So we're starting to go into veraison now, and shoot tips should be almost have stopped growing. Irrigation has been cut way back and used very sparingly. Kind of watch for weather forecasts and see if you have any of these 100-degree heat spikes that come up. So you got to be prepared for those kinds of things if needed. By late August, the berries have swollen up and the clusters can become tight. And that, of course, is if you haven't used gibberellic acid. It hasn't been at any rate, you go through a phase here for starting at about the middle of August in our area where the berries actually really start growing and swelling. If you haven't separated your clusters, you're going to have more rot problems. But by separating these clusters, it's going to take about 3.5 weeks, something like that you're going to be going through this berry swell, and you're going to notice perhaps more and more rot going on. Now, and I mean it's not prevalent, but it's out there, and you just got to kind of wait it out. Don't try to necessarily go in there and start cutting it out early because it could be just because it's starting to show up. Let it run out. A lot of it actually dries up, but you can kind of clean your crop up afterwards. Also, it's a good time to just kind of check and cut some of these clusters open and see if you have any worm damage, that kind of thing. If so, you might have to treat for that. While the berries are being pumped up, you're using irrigation sparingly, perhaps 6 to 8 hours per week if it's hot. I don't just want to add more juice into the berries, but I just want to make sure that the juices maybe just keep flowing under these hot temperatures. It's a good time to use possibly if you have a pressure bomb. You can check some of the leaves with your pressure bomb, and that can kind of tell you, do your vines actually need water or not? Lots of walking and checking throughout the vineyard. Any weak areas, problem areas, those are things you want to be looking for. After the 3 weeks or so, you have berry shrinkage. Coat of bloom will start coming over the berries and sugar rises. Do you need water? That's, again, watching the forecast. Trying to keep your leaves green because it's a lot of transferring of potassium from your leaves into your fruit for sugars. Now when I go through, I'm looking for an eventual leathery kind of a feeling. I go through the vineyard, and after you go through this bit of shrinkage, and you do want a little dehydration, and just try to feel the clusters as well as checking with the sugars. And you just kind of come to a point where everything just comes in just right. Looking at about 25, 26 sugar or bricks usually. Pull the berries off, put them in your mouth, chew them up real good, and spit. How dark is your saliva? How does it taste? And that kind of concludes as far as where we come to as far as harvest goes. And we'll, at those sugar levels, we'll go ahead and move on with harvest after the winery representatives have come and checked our vineyards. Now, a thinning debate is that if you want to have really good Petite Sirah, that it's going to take thinning, usually heavy thinning, separation of clusters. Petite Sirah clusters are often a little too big for high quality. The clusters themselves often require thinning. Good light, exposure, controlled vigor, attention to fertility, and moisture needs. Again, growers can't be producing fruit for average red wine. It's got to have all the characteristics of Petite Sirah that his or her vineyard is capable of producing, or you have nothing, in my opinion. Growing Petite Sirah can be expensive, a little nerve-wracking, and time-consuming. Yields have to take third or fourth place in a grower's goals oftentimes. You have to succeed with quality. Usually the yields are fine. Last year was a very unusual situation for us. As many of you probably experienced, we had a big heat spike. I don't know, it was late August or something like that. And boy, we ended up cutting a lot of fruit that actually looked really good. It was coming on beautifully, but we just had to go through with the crew and drop a lot more, and our yields suffered. But the ultimate goal is to make the winery happy, and they were very happy. The colors and the testing, they told us, was off the charts. So we did our job. Now some suggestions or thoughts to guide you for high quality testing is wineries might consider phenolics and anthocyanin testing. Perhaps you have some other parameters that you would like to work with. Work out a formula where you can pay a bare minimum to the grower for acceptable fruit and a maximum for outstanding fruit. Give the grower something to shoot for and reward him or her when performance goals are met. The grower knows that if he's going to be with a winery for a long time, that he can't fail his customer. Wineries are counting on the growers. They need good Petite Sirah. Yield might not be a limitation either if the quality is there. The winery may pay the maximum for great fruit, but that's what they want. That's the incentive to get the grower to perform. It's been working real well with me, with one of my customers, and both of us are real happy. I kind of wish that some of the other customers would would look into that too. But when it comes to phenolics, the color, pH, acid, certain benchmarks, I mean, Petite Sirah is a very unusual and a very intense wine, I think, and that's my talk.
Great. Thank you, Ken.
Questions?
We have a couple minutes before we go into our mid-morning break. If anybody has any questions they'd like to direct to Mark or Dan or Ken.
You had mentioned particular rootstocks that prevent the potassium from coming up. Are there some recommendations that you have?
I've had, well, I'll tell you what. I can tell you what my experience has been, and I've had the best luck with SO4. But another thing, I talked about this advisor, and I would highly recommend you get a guy like him. I could get you in touch with him, but we dig pits. He jumps in the hole. He takes his samples, so forth, sends it in. You know, he's a pretty well-educated guy on soils and fertility and so forth, and he recommends a rootstock. And I feel I'm feeling better about going that route rather than trying to figure some of this stuff out myself. And you get a consultant, and it's like a part-time employee. You know, he's not on full-time; he's on part-time, and he'll give good advice, and I think he's smarter than I am on all that kind of stuff. But SO4 is a good one for us.
Question for Dan. Dan Berger, you said that, well, can you say which major wines do you think that Petite Sirah is being added to for the blend? Would it be like the heavier wines like Cabernet or Syrah?
I think Petite Sirah is the solution to problems related to overproduction of other varieties. Unfortunately, I see a number of Cabernet producers with excess Cabernet using Petite Sirah to solve the problem. And the benefit is having Petite Sirah in the bottle, and the drawback's having Cabernet in the bottle. And so as a result, I see a lot of blends that I just don't see make any sense. And you taste, I mean, Steve, you taste through probably as many wines as I do, and if you're as critical as I am, you'll find that about 80% of the blends that you taste out there are just not very interesting. It's red wine.
Well, yeah, I guess you're talking about like where they actually say on the label that this is a proprietary blend. Well, what I was driving at is, do you think that Petite Sirah is being used, you know, below 24% to boost varietally labeled wines?
Oh, I would imagine that does occur when I think there are degrees of quality of Petite Sirah, and I think when it's not great quality Petite Sirah and it's used essentially for color and for essentially propping up a wine, then in that case the varietal itself is either compromised or helped. It just sort of depends. Zinfandel, I would say at least 50% of the great Zinfandels in Sonoma County have some Petite Sirah in it because they need it. Not because the Zinfandel is deficient, but because it is somewhat one-dimensional. If you've got a monochromatic wine, you need something additional. Petite Sirah is your solution because it gives you something that's not in Zinfandel. So when we see good Zinfandel blends, and they say Zinfandel on the label, you can pretty well guess that there's a substantial portion of Petite Sirah in there to give it some character.
Okay. David has, I'm sure, similar opinions. We have these wonderful Zin vineyards, historic vineyards that have been a mix of these wonderful varietals, and we consider Zinfandel having companions, and it's part of the soul of what makes these wines. These aren't things that we go out and we count. they're just out there. Bob, do you have anything?
Not to get controversial, but I do think Petite Sirah, of course, has a role in co-fermentations and flavor profiles in Zin, but there are so many good pure Zin wines that I know of that are standalone, and so I would just caution to be careful with using, you know, those statements amongst Zinfandel producers as well, because there are some very strong Zinfandel.
I wasn't
pure
alluding to
wines.
all Zin.
Okay,
Okay.
I'll shut up. Over there.
Yeah, Ken, you're in a unique growing situation down there in the Delta, and you've got a tremendous amount of experience, many years with a lot of different varietals, and so you had alluded to the importance of kicking Petite, like all reds, into veraison, switching over from vegetative by pulling back the water. And I just wondered, compared to other varieties that you work with, what's the sensitivity to drought stress, and how is that game different in Petite Sirah than it is in some of the other grapes?
Well, it can depend on the site itself, but when I look at fruit clusters, mostly Petite Sirah, I have to admit I'm kind of doing a lot of seat of the pants. You know, it's I'm just trying to keep the vine as happy as I can, and so I'm looking at leaves, and I look at if they're starting to droop a little bit in the afternoon, which is not necessarily real bad, but it's like, watch out, okay. But at the same time, it's like we gotta try to get this rot situation under better control. Now, again, we don't have rampant rot, but every time you cut a cluster or two off each vine, that adds up, you know. And I'm just trying to, I'm trying to starve the cluster. I don't know if that's the right word, but you know, I'm trying not to pump it up any more than I have to, because it's just doing it on its own. I don't know where this moisture's coming from, but I'm just trying to keep it under control, keep the fruit under some shade, but exposed to light, and whether maybe it's bouncing up or from the ground, reflecting that way, or being filtered through the leaves as the sun moves and so forth. And I'm just trying to keep the thing from from turning south on me, you know, and just feeling along. Sometimes I'll be out there 2-3 times a week. It just depends upon how warm it is out there. Just looking and walking, and I mean, it's just a lot of work, you know, running back and forth, because we have currently we've got about 200 acres of just Petite Sirah right now. So it keeps me busy even on Sundays, you know, during the month of August. I don't know if that answers your question. Is that? Yeah.
I think we have one more question, and then we'll take a 15-minute break.
Okay.
Wilford?
Yes, hi. So I have a question for Ken. You said that you try to push your yield to be 7 to 8 tons per acre. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Now, to me, that seems like a very large number. Have you ever tried to lower that to a lower amount, and did you get a yield quality that you did not like, and that's why you're going to 7 to 8 tons per acre?
Well, the only way I can really answer that is that, you know, our soils are more fertile, so we do get nice canopies, generally speaking. And one thing I'm looking for too is some balance between the foliage and the fruit that's that's on the vine. One thing is that, we do have a little challenge sometimes slowing the vine down a little bit, and that can be helped by making it work a little bit harder. And I think our prices are probably a little lower than, say, on the coast and so forth. But we get, we have more warm weather, and our weather, the weather and the fertility in our area, I think, allows us to do what we do and the way we do it. I don't think we're gonna, I'll push. Can I make a higher quality by cutting some more fruit off? Maybe, but I'm not convinced of that. I'm not convinced of that. One of our buyers has been buying fruit from us since the 1970s. And they're actually the one doing this testing, and they say, just keep it up. So that's why I say, like, if you can still get the quality that they need, and they use it all for blending in a bunch of their other reds. Very well-known winery to everybody here, I'm sure, and he's happy. So I'll get that extra $1,000 if I can,
So if your measurement is on this one winery who's producing X amount of produce from your product, then of course we won't know the name of the winery, which is fine. I'm not interested in knowing that name. But then if you had another winery, say some other winery here, saying, Ken, we want this level of quality, and we will pay more for slightly lower tonnage, or are you saying that because you're in a warmer area, that this is